Hello, I'm Santiago Roncagliolo. I wrote a novel called Red April, which is a political thriller, a serial killer thriller, based in Peru, my country, during the Cold War. Um, it is a black humor story and a very bloody story and a mystery story. Well, I guess in poor countries, I guess also in India, sense of humor is a way to defend you from reality. You cannot change everything you would like to change, so you laugh a lot and you try to relax. And you develop a very black sense of humor. I always have this kind of humor. I cannot avoid it. It's part of my way to see. And I wanted to talk about a moment when everybody in my country, as in many countries, everybody turned into serial killers. Everybody were, or whether killing or defending somebody killing other people. And so the novel begins as a comedy and gets more and more violent as reality was. And the main character, the prosecutor Felix Chacaltana, is a very peculiar detective in crime novel because it's a detective who's trying not to research, not to know nothing, not to really be aware of reality. But reality is so violent that explodes into his face. He just wants to close his file and forget it all about it, and he can't. Reality is stronger than him. Well, I guess every time, I've seen this in Spain also, where I live, with the memories of the Civil War. After a very violent time, everybody wants to forget because it's painful to remember, and everybody wants to erase the past, eliminate what happened. But sometimes this keeps coming back. In politics, in history, in everyday people's life, this past, if you do not talk about it, if you do not try to understand it, it's coming always back and giving you problems in the present. And that's the process of Felix Chacaltana. He tries not to know what happened, but he cannot live. This is really affecting his life. And this happened in Peru during the 80s, because we have a very violent war with 70,000 people dying. But I guess it happens after all wars, one way or another. The scars of the past are always hurting the present. The action of this novel, Red April, happens during a Catholic ceremony called the Holy Week, which is a celebration of death, really. The death of Christ and his reborn, his resurrection days later. So for a few days in the Catholic countries, you can see dead everywhere. You can see the Virgin Mary with 7 knives across her heart. You can see Christ bleeding naked into a transparent coffin. This happens in April, and it's a very deadly moment. And I had the feeling that it was perfect for a thriller, really. I had been there in this ceremony in Peru and think, if I were a serial killer, I would kill one people each day of this ceremony with all the ornamental dressing of death, of the ceremony of death. And that's what the serial killer does. He kills one of his victims in each day of the Holy Week. Well, I wanted to talk about this Peruvian kind of civil war, but I realized that it was too horrible. I had been making research, I had been talking with the people involved, and I couldn't just tell the story. You wouldn't like to read that. After 10 pages you would be tired. But I wanted to talk about it, so I put the serial killer in the first plan, because it's fiction. you know it's invented. And while the detective researched that, he discovers the other plan, the reality. All the violence of the war is in second plan, being discovered during the investigation. And that's the real one. And everything I tell is very real about the tortures, disappearance, about the killings. But since the monster in the first plan is clearly fiction, you can read it, you can enjoy it. You can know reality, at the same time you have a nice plot to read. I usually write in third person. Not always, but usually, because then in third person the writer becomes like a camera. You are outside the things, showing things. And I like a lot cinema. Everything I write is very cinematographical, very visual, because I want to produce in my novels the same connection you have when you go to cinema. You know, when you go to watch a film, you forget there's a reality outside, and you live with these characters for a while in the screen. And I want the same effect in the reader. I want him to forget somebody's telling him this story, to forget there's a world outside this story, to enter into it and live with the characters and live in these places and kill with the killer and suffer with the prosecutor. I'm very classical, yes. In fact, I admire I'm so classical that I admire Aristotle, you know. I guess Aristotle discovered the way to tell stories for 25 centuries later. That man would be living now, he would be rich. He understands perfectly how to attract people to a story, how to attract the reader or the spectator. And his rules keep being used in Hollywood and, of course, in my books. Yes, yes, I have one book which has been taken to cinema. And I have sold a couple of first options. But I've realized I make very expensive stories. You must go to Ayacucho, recreate the Holy Week. I mean, it's a very spectacular thing I do. Maybe I write books because it would take too long to get the money to make these films. I have friends making cinema, and most of the time they are raising money. They are trying to get the money because it's too expensive. They need $5 million, $4 million. I need nothing. I just sit in my home, no budget. The only limit is my imagination. So I can make stories based in the mafia, Italian mafia in Caribbean in the 50s, or the Peruvian Civil War of the 80s, or Japan, and there's not a producer screaming in panic by my side. Well, I not just like cinema, but I come from a tradition of writers in Latin America, very sophisticated. Writers like Vargas Llosa or Garcia Marquez would work a lot in the language, in the way things were written. So in a natural way, I have also this tradition, and I love to use language to tell different things out from the plot. In this case, in this novel, I put reports the prosecutor is writing, because he writes in a very strange language, in legalese language, and at the same time a kind of reflections of the assassin, which are in a very chaotic language, and somehow they represent the order and chaos, which is the basic opposition among them, and somehow they get to be not so different in a way. One thing I liked is this mirror game in which the good one and the bad one can switch places anytime, and I use language to show this all along the novel. Oh, it is very complicated to make to say that all Latin Americans have something in common in the way they write. But in the 60s and 70s, we just had many different writers: Vargas Llosa, Garcia Marquez, Julio Cortázar, Borges, Carlos Fuentes, Rulfo, which were suddenly trying to tell a story in a different way. Maybe they would begin by the end. Maybe they would make a story you can read beginning from any given chapter. Maybe they would create irrational world of magical realism, or try to make a global novel with 50 or 60 stories crossing one to each other. And they wanted to defy the limits of reality, the limits of language, because those are the limits of reality. And they, for the next generations, they told us many things. I'm not sure you cannot keep writing this way. I mean, it's, in fact, somehow I guess literature in the 21st century is coming back to the 19th century, to the storytelling, plain storytelling, characters, plot. But it will never be the same again, because we have this thing that happened and we changed the way we understand literature one way or another. At this particular moment, one of the things I most feel grateful for Red April is bringing me to India. I'm having a great time in India, and I've realized how similar it is in many things to Peru. Many of the people I look around could be Peruvians physically. The food, in many ways, is like Peruvian food. The traffic is very Peruvian. And I love that books take what you know about the world, but it's lovely when they take you to know more about the world, and it's lovely when you find yourself really at home in a place you never expected, 20,000 kilometers from home, and you owe that to a book. So I must say thank you to Prosecutor Chacaltana for this chance, and I'm sure he would be happy to be here, and he's happy to speak English because he's very, he wants to be cultivated, and the idea of being here in English would make him very happy.